Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Andrew Kirchhoff, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, we're going to be conducting our very first live mock draft for the 2021 fantasy football season. On today's episode, of course, as you can see behind me, we're going to be conducting a couple simulated mock drafts, but that's just only the beginning of the video. After I kind of explain to you guys my perspective and opinion as to what I believe is the best draft strategy going into our 2021 fantasy football drafts, I'm going to go ahead and hop into a live half PPR mock draft and execute said strategies. And I know in a live draft, there's absolute chaos. Players are being taken way out of their ADPs, but I don't care. The valuation of a player is whatever you believe it to be. And if someone wants to go ahead and take a player as high as they want, go for it, because maybe that ends up panning out. But regardless, after we go ahead and I explain to you guys the statistics and the backing of why I execute this specific strategy, we'll hop into that live half PPR mock draft. Now, before we begin today's video, I want to thank you guys for the incredible support that you guys have shown me thus far this week. Again, we've just gotten back into creating content here on the channel, but if you have not yet already, make sure you subscribe to the channel. We're going to be making a bunch of content daily for the entirety of the 2021 fantasy football season. All off season, we'll be making draft strategy videos, whether it's Superflex, Zero RB, full PPR, mock drafts, left, right, and center. That is definitely going to be a thing. I'll be talking sleepers in the coming days, of course, rankings, tier lists, all of that here on the channel. Going into the regular season, which will have, of course, rankings, waiver wire pickups, live streams before kickoff, answering your guys' questions. But either way, make sure you subscribe to the channel. You'll find fantasy football content here on the daily, and it'll certainly help you win your league. Now, let's get into today's video. Before I go ahead and I make the 5th overall selection, of course, probably Zeke is the guy that I'm going to be selecting here based on my draft rankings the other day. I want to explain to you guys what exactly I mean by the statistics behind my draft strategy. Now, a lot of people have their own personal draft strategy, but do they understand the reasoning and the statistics that back said strategy? I don't know. I went ahead and I did some research, and I wanted to kind of explain to you guys what exactly I see and why I go ahead and I execute it as I do. I love to take running backs early because after the great, top 15, 16 running backs are gone, it's a wasteland. I mean, I'm talking about busts left, right, and center. Guys that are they're not worth their investment. I mean, last year, we all got torched by Todd Gurley's, Le'Veon Bell's, David Johnson's. These are guys that hurt us horribly last season. And why go and invest in them again, in that tier of player again, when you can go ahead, take your running backs early, invest in wide receivers later because there's so much depth at the wide receiver position, and of course, take a great tight end early because you don't want to be the guy in your league that's trying to trade for a tight end all season long because you weren't able to get one in your draft, and you're suffering with a guy that's putting up 5 points a week, and you're consistently trying to, rewrite and pick somebody up off the waiver wire and hope that they end up panning out. You don't want to be that guy. So again, let's talk about the statistics that I like to employ going into my 2021 fantasy football drafts. The graphic that comes up on screen is called the drop-off in production. For a half PPR setting, I think this is one of the most valuable things that you certainly need to be aware of. The drop-off in production is a stat that I've been using over the last couple of years, and I'm fairly certain I've shown it to you guys, but not in such high quality. Of course, the graphics have improved this season, as you can see. Either way, let me explain to you what this exactly means. If you go ahead and you look at the top left statistic, from 2018 to 2020, I took the averages of the RB1s and I put them up against the wide receiver one position in a half PPR scoring format. As you can see, the average from the RB1s in the last 3 seasons was 257.16 fantasy points, while the average between the wide receiver ones over the last 3 seasons was 236.8 fantasy points. Now, of course, this goes ahead and speaks volumes as to why the running back position is so highly coveted. Again, there's a lot of teams that are going to draft double RB, triple RB early because they want to go ahead and take advantage of this potential, grabbing an RB1, a guy that is certainly going to produce and carry your team. Obviously, the wide receiver position hasn't been as successful, but in a half PPR, it's not as even. If you go into a full PPR setting, it's definitely far more even than you would anticipate. Regardless, between a wide receiver one and an RB1, wide receiver ones have a little bit of a 7.92% drop, almost 8%, but it pretty much rounds out to 20.36 fantasy point per game drop on average between the wide receiver ones in comparison. Now, if you go ahead and just isolate running back ones versus RB2s, if you go to the right side of the screen, from 2018 to 2020, if you go ahead and check their averages, again, like we mentioned, 257.16 fantasy points for RB1s, but the average for RB2s were 174.23 points. That's a 32% drop and nearly 33 fantasy points on average per player. That is a ridiculous amount. And yes, it doesn't encompass the entire RB2 position because, the number 13 overall running back could produce 210 fantasy points. But as a whole, the RB2 position in comparison to RB1s has an insanely wide drop off. Now, if we go ahead and we compare the drop off between wide receiver 1s and wide receiver 2s, it's not nearly as close as that because there is so much depth at the wide receiver position, and there is far more valuable guys that we can invest in later in our drafts that are going to produce far more points. I mean, in comparison, it's only a 22% drop and 52 fantasy points. I mean, a 30 fantasy point difference is honestly going to pay dividends as we go ahead and invest properly. Now, if we go ahead and check out the difference between an RB2 and a wide receiver 2 on the bottom left, we go ahead and see that investing in an RB2 at times is going to be a mistake. Like I mentioned earlier, there is a lot of landmines out there, and instead of investing in an RB2 in the fourth, fifth, sixth round and hoping that they end up panning out, I would 100% suggest making sure you address that in the first 3 rounds, take the guys that you know are going to be studs, and then address the wide receiver position later, because again, there is so much depth in that wide receiver 2 range that you can even find guys like a Calvin Ridley, like a Chris Godwin, that in that year hop into the conversation of being a wide receiver 1. Now, before we close this out, I wanted to go ahead and also share the full PPR drop off in production between RB1s and wide receiver 1s. It is nearly identical. In fact, the wide receiver 1 position has dominated on average in comparison to RB1s. Now, of course, there is the occasional RB1 that goes for 400 fantasy points, Christian McCaffrey, and that certainly makes a difference in terms of the averages. But all in all, in terms of a full PPR, the wide receiver 1 via the RB1 is fairly even, and that's why you'll see far more wide receivers taken in the first round of a full PPR draft. Now, if you go ahead and once again compare RB1s to RB2s, there is certainly a drop-off. In fact, it even grows more because the top 12 at the RB position are the guys that are getting the receptions. That's why they're in that conversation first and foremost, while as we continue to go down, guys are getting far less opportunities and not being able to produce on them. Now, if we compare wide receiver 1s to wide receiver 2s, of course, it is a similar drop-off, pretty much 30 points, just as it was in the half PPR setting. But once we look at the difference between RB2s and wide receiver 2s, the difference in the advantage that goes in the direction of wide receiver 2s is that much more significant, nearly 30-point difference in terms of an average jump. So again, hopefully this kind of gives you a perspective as to why exactly we want to go ahead and wait on wide receivers and take those running backs as early as we possibly can. So we'll go ahead and transition back into our simulated draft here. I am the number 5 overall pick. I will be selecting Ezekiel Elliott, like I mentioned earlier, and we're going to execute this draft as best as we possibly can. Let's go ahead and take Zeke with our first round selection and the number 5 overall. All right, so we're certainly going to see running backs, of course, come off the board. Wide receivers, Travis Kelce, quarterback. All right, cool. So as we can see, the best available players. Let's go to the running back position. Like I mentioned, we want to address running back as quickly as we possibly can. Najee Harris, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, DeAndre Swift. Those are great prospects, especially one that plays for the Pittsburgh Steelers. That one is a glaring thing. And then we have Justin Jefferson. Here's the conversation. Do I invest in a Najee Harris and take the risk of him and his offensive line, and I can guarantee he's going to touch the ball 300 times? Or do I go ahead and invest in the value of Justin Jefferson? There is a huge conversation to be had here because, again, the wide receiver 1 position could just be as valuable, if not more valuable, than an RB if you find the right guy. But for the purpose of this strategy, I want to go ahead and I want to address the running back position because I know I can find a lot more depth of value at the wide receiver position later in my draft. Now, as of thus far, the tight end position has come off the board according to what I anticipated. I really hoped that George Kittle could fall to me, but that's not going to be the case in this specific scenario. So we'll go ahead and we'll look at what's available. At the running back position, there is still a lot of depth, and I personally do believe we can go ahead and address this in the 4th and 5th round, but quite certainly, I think the 4th round is where I'll probably invest in another running back because I think Darrell Henderson, as right now, has that 4th round ADP, which is criminally low considering the amount of opportunity he's going to have this year without a guy like Cam Akers in the lineup. But in terms of wide receivers available, I mean, Keenan Allen's available, and I'm absolutely going to invest there because, again, as a 3rd round value, a guy that, like I mentioned yesterday, was averaging 16 fantasy points per game with Justin Herbert in the lineup when he's healthy. That's just an absolute steal. The third quarterback has been taken. Josh Allen has come off the board accordingly. Again, when we look at the value at the wide receiver position, I can still get a guy like Robert Woods in the 4th round. I'm telling you guys, Robert Woods could even be a top 12 wide receiver this year. You've seen what Matthew Stafford has been able to do with the likes of Marvin Jones, Golden Tate, Kenny Golladay, Calvin Johnson. He has made wide receiver ones out of, I wouldn't say nothing. Calvin Johnson's going to go to the Hall of Fame next week. But either way, the whole point is he can make guys very easily top tier at the position. With this said, there is the potential of drafting a Darrell Henderson right now. And I do think that is a very good decision to make, because I can go ahead and I can select this running back here, lock in my flex and be done. Or I can take the wide receiver here in the likes of, let's say, for example, Robert Woods, and lock him down and be done. We're going to try both strategies out. Personally, if it was me, I have enough confidence in Darrell Henderson, assuming nobody fills that void in the next coming weeks, to where I'm going to select him there. And then I'm going to follow that up with a selection like Tyler Lockett. Again, Tyler Lockett has been a wide receiver, obviously finishes a wide receiver 1 last season, but has been in the top 15 wide receiver rankings for the last 3 consecutive seasons. He is certainly going to be a big part of that offense. I know he fell off in the second half of the season along with Russell Wilson, but taking him in the 5th round, he was a wide receiver 1 last year. He's getting hundreds of targets a year. What are we doing? It blows my mind at times. Now, of course, I wasn't able to go ahead and select one of the stud tight ends that I like, but again, we could go ahead and, in the future, we're going to go ahead and do another simulated draft. We'll go ahead and address that as quickly as we possibly can, because again, at the value of 5.01, or 5.05, I'm definitely going to take a Tyler Lockett over a Mark Andrews and invest accordingly. Now, in terms of what else is available, of course, I want to grab a stud quarterback. I want to make sure that I don't get gypped when I get into this later round. So I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to make my investment. I really do like Justin Herbert. Again, I pair him up with Keenan Allen. I have a lot of confidence in that offense, as you can obviously tell. And then we'll go ahead. And as of this moment, there's still a lot of talent on the board. At the wide receiver position, I can still wait and get guys far later down the draft board that are going to bolster my lineup and be a solid wide receiver 3 on a weekly basis. I can certainly go into the running back position and try to draft the Chase Edmonds and hope that he ends up being a stud. But the whole point is understanding that selecting those 2 running backs early and accompanying them with 2 wide receivers that you can certainly benefit from later in your draft is smart. Now that we've conducted the early strategy here, of course, I want to go ahead and select from a different position, because again, I'm looking to try to draft an early tight end along with an early quarterback instead of potentially getting that Darrell Henderson in the 4th round. So let's go ahead and let's switch our spot here and see what we can produce. All right, so I went ahead and moved myself to the 9th overall selection. I find myself in a situation in which the top 8 running backs are off the board, and the best available one at this current moment in time is Nick Chubb. We could potentially take a Davante Adams, but in the sake of course, this strategy, I want to go ahead and invest in running back. So we'll take Nick Chubb as the number 9 overall pick, and then we'll see what comes back to us. Again, Najee Harris, this is 2 drafts in a row where he's coming back to my lap. I'll go ahead and invest in him once again, and then we'll see what we can potentially address in the 3rd round. Of course, the quarterback position comes off the board with 2 tight ends. That shouldn't be a surprise. And now that we get into this 3rd round, we look at the available talent. I'll certainly take a guy like CeeDee Lamb in the 3rd round. And as it scoops back around, we're looking at what else is available at wide receiver position. We have great value at Julio Jones, Chris Godwin, and Robert Woods. Why not? These are guys in the 3rd or 4th round that are extremely undervalued because of how many people are taking running back early. It is giving me the opportunity to invest in wide receivers that I wouldn't normally have an opportunity to grab. And because I don't need to draft a running back at this current moment in time, I can take the advantages that I'm given and take a Robert Woods in the 4th round. We'll go ahead and do that. And as the draft will come back, hopefully I can set myself up with even more success with the combination of a tight end, which exactly falls into my lap. I love TJ Hawkinson this season, perfectly in time to grab him as Mark Andrews was taken right in front of me. Again, this is a guy that's going to get over 100 targets this season with Jared Goff. Again, when we saw Jared Goff last season, or a couple seasons ago, 2019, with Tyler Higbee, funnel targeting him the ball 10 plus times a game. Tyler Higbee was an incredible tight end, and he got himself into the top 6 just off of 5 weeks of work. So again, incredible numbers potentially on the way for a guy like Hawkinson. Now, we look at what else is available on the board. Of course, there are other wide receivers here. There are running backs you can invest in. I don't mind a Mike Davis here at all. In any capacity, this is a great pick. But honestly, if I want to invest and go for the big upside, why not go grab a quarterback here that is going to be able to dominate on a weekly basis? We saw what he was able to do last season. Go ahead and invest in Dak in the 6th round, come back around, and then address the following positions. This is what I'm talking about. The fact that you can get a CD and a Robert Woods in the 3rd and 4th rounds is such a great investment and has so much potential upside for that investment. It's unbelievable. Either way, those are the couple mock drafts I wanted to conduct via simulated. Now we'll get into the live mock draft and kind of execute this accordingly. So let's get right into it, shall we? All right, so I find myself as the number 9 overall selection in the 1st round for this live mock draft that I'll be conducting on Yahoo. So as the picks come off the board, again, we're looking for a running back to begin with. If 8 running backs are taken off the board, so be it. I still want to go ahead and lock in my stud RB1 that is going to carry my team for the entirety of the season. If there's a potential that a guy falls to me because the wide receiver position or Travis Kelce begins to garner more traction, then so be it. We'll go ahead and we'll invest accordingly and try to build the best potential rosters we can. Now, of course, we're looking for running backs in the first 2 rounds, but if in fact something drops to me in the 2nd round, like a Davante Adams, a Tyreek Hill, or Travis Kelce, we're certainly going to invest. We're not going to ignore the fact that those are far more valuable prospects, that the investment is way more valuable than the strategy itself. So as you can see, the running back position is flying off the board. That shouldn't be a surprise in any capacity. We saw that in the simulations, and that is probably going to continue to hold weight here. Now, Ezekiel Elliott has not come off the board yet. If he can go ahead and fall to me here, Tony, if you want to do me a favor, that would be fantastic. And let me have Zeke. And unfortunately, Tony is going to probably snag Zeke here. In which he did, of course. Now, we'll go ahead and we'll look at the best available running backs that are on the board. As of right now, it is Aaron Jones. I'll invest in Aaron Jones. I don't have a problem with that in any capacity. Again, the wide receiver position is probably going to pull a lot of weight here. As we anticipated, the wide receiver position and or Travis Kelce were going to be selected, but when we come back around, Najee Harris is our running back. This is a guy that I am taking in every 2nd round that I possibly can this season. Of course, I would have loved for Zeke to have dropped to me, but I'm certainly happy with the investment of an Aaron Jones in the 1st round. Of course, there can be an argument of taking Davante Adams over him, but in this specific purpose, we're going to go ahead and invest accordingly, and then we'll bring it back when we get into the 3rd round. As the picks swing back in my direction, as we can see, the wide receiver position was definitely addressed in the 2nd and 3rd round. Of course, my potential desired pick for this upcoming round would be a tight end if George Kittle is to surpass Tony here, and Tony does me the solid favor letting George Kittle come to me. I'll explain to you in comparison to the other available prospects why exactly I'd like to invest in him. Now, it all depends on what Tony's selection ends up being here. He goes with another running back. Very interesting selection. So when we look at the available wide receivers, of course, there's a lot of depth, and that's exactly why I want to wait on them, because once it comes back in the 4th round, I can easily get myself a Cooper Kupp or a Deontay Johnson. So why not go ahead, select a top 3 tight end like George Kittle, and go ahead and not have to worry about this tight end position. Get a guy that over the last 3 seasons, when healthy, has averaged about 13.5 fantasy points per game, was almost on track to surpassing Travis Kelce in 2019 if he had stayed healthy for the whole year. Again, George Kittle, a lot of people talk about Darren Waller as much as they do, but George Kittle is just as valuable as long as he's on the field. I think, of course, health is a big difference maker in his specific scenario, but I'm 100% willing to invest in George Kittle, knowing he's only going to play 14 games. But in those 14 games will be a very valuable asset to my fantasy team altogether. As the draft begins to swoop back around, while everyone is addressing the running back position, guys that I don't want to touch. I don't want to touch Josh Jacobs in the 4th round. In the 5th and 6th round, don't get me wrong, I'll take it. But as of right now, I'm happy that I selected running backs, and I see that the wide receiver position isn't being addressed, and it's going to come back to me in the 4th round. And I'm going to be able to invest in wide receiver. And in fact, in the 5th round, now that we've seen what happened in the 2nd and 3rd for the rest of the league, they're probably not going to be dressing wide receiver. They're going to need their 2nd running backs. And that's going to give me the advantage of taking multiple wide receivers in these rounds and finding a lot of value from within them. Now, of the available guys, like I mentioned, of course, I love Robert Woods. And I'm just going to keep doing it, man. I can't stop. He is such great value in the 4th round. And it makes me feel good inside, man. I'm bringing a Ram home, and it's not just a normal, regular Ram. This is the number 1 wide receiver of the Rams offense. A guy that is going to have far more opportunity than he has had in years past, with a far improved offense with the quarterback position being adjusted. You're bringing in more talent at the wide receiver position, like a Deshaun Jackson. You're drafting Tutu Atwell to go ahead and expand the offense. You're letting the deep ball enter the area. Wow, this guy is a running back fiend. And then you go ahead and run it accordingly. This is actually good. The fact that Toney is harboring the entire running back roster makes me feel confident that everyone else is going to be taking garbage RBs that are in that fringe bust range that could end up panning out for me in this year league. But either way, we're just going to see how it continues to transpire, and we'll update you once my fifth round pick is just around the corner. As we can see on screen, the end of the fourth and beginning of the fifth round did not go as I anticipated. We have a bunch of psychopaths in our presence, in our midst, and it seems like they have heavily invested in the wide receiver position, and in fact ignored outright the running back position, which is interesting. The tight end position, of course, is being taken up in the fifth round, which I anticipated. If Toney goes for another running back, then I am officially being trolled. All right. Let's see what available wide receivers we have. Brandon Ayuk, as of right now, seems to be the best. Kenny Golladay, T. Higgins, Jamar Chase is still on the board, Odell Beckham Jr. As it currently stands, I need to address the wide receiver position. That is a given. But who am I investing in as of right now? I like Brandon Ayuk a lot, but as of this current moment in time, I'm looking to invest in a guy like Kenny Golladay or T. Higgins. Looking at the fact that I already have a George Kittle, if I invest in both San Francisco 49ers, and if in fact that offense is in flux, Jimmy Garoppolo is not playing as well, Trey Lance doesn't pan out, accordingly, I could be in potential trouble, and I don't want to be in that scenario. So let's go ahead. Let's address another wide receiver position. I mean, based on how this draft has already constructed itself, I could see why exactly someone would take the Tyreek Hill over the Aaron Jones, because I could have done that. I could have taken Tyreek instead of Aaron Jones, and in the fourth round taken Darrell Henderson instead of Robert Woods, and been in a very similar scenario in which I'm confident in my draft. But again, we're drafting running backs early, addressing the tight end position, going ahead and taking wide receivers later in the rounds, because again, they're at a premium, and you can go ahead and invest in guys that are potentially going to be upside wide receiver 2s and potentially wide receiver 1s. As the draft comes back to me, again, we're looking for a quarterback. We're looking for a guy that I can invest in and just be confident in for the rest of the season. I see Justin Herbert and or Russell Wilson as guys that are going to come back to me as it currently stands. There have already been, 3-6 quarterbacks taken. I think if in fact I wait, I can invest in a later round guy like a Ryan Tannehill. But instead of doing so, oh man, I could take Jamar Chase right here. Ooh, you know what? That's exactly what we'll do. We'll go ahead and wait on the quarterback. I'm going to go ahead and take another wide receiver that I really like. In a 3 wide receiver league, I'm pretty happy with this setup. So once it comes back around, we'll talk about the 7th and 8th round picks. But until then. All right, so as the 7th round approaches, the thing that I wanted to point out, and completely after my pick, of course, I'm still being trolled by Tony over here. Tony just racking up all the running backs. Every running back in this 6th, 7th round is an RBBC kind of guy. Chase Edmonds has to split with James Conner. Leonard Fournette has to split with Ronald Jones. Damian Harris has to split with James White and Sony Michel. James Robinson and Travis Etienne are together. Javonte Williams is going to get outworked by Melvin Gordon. Michael Carter and Tevin Coleman and whoever else is going to be in that Jets backfield. Raheem Mostert, Trey Sermon, Wayne Gallman. These guys are all together. And for some reason, they've gone ahead and they've invested accordingly. When I go ahead and I see that there's 3 quarterbacks already taken here, I don't need to invest in quarterback. In fact, I need to do the opposite. I need to invest in a running back here. And a guy that I'm fairly confident in that's going to outwork Javonte Williams is Melvin Gordon. So I'll take Melvin Gordon in the 7th. The draft will go down the list. Of course, these guys have already selected Dak Prescott, Patrick Mahomes, and Kyler Murray. It'll come back to me. I will take my Ryan Tannehill, who of course is a steal at the quarterback position. Imagine drafting Ryan Tannehill after the season he had last year, after the season he had in 2019. This is one of the best fantasy quarterbacks in the last, 24 games? He has been un-effing believable. But a lot of people undervalue him. And so be it. I'm going to benefit from that under-evaluation and the mistakes of others. And these are the advantages that I'm talking about. I've addressed 3 running backs. I've addressed 3 wide receivers. I've taken my tight end of choice. And all I need to go ahead and do is select my quarterback. And then it's all about building depth. It's about building guys that have high upside at the wide receiver at the running back position, selecting a tight end that I can go ahead and trade later in the season. I want to invest in guys like Irv Smith or Adam Trotman, the tight end from the Tennessee Titans, so that if in fact they end up popping off, why not? I can go ahead and even trade Kittle or trade one of them to get more depth and or value later in the season. Those are why the investments are made. Again, other running backs here, though there's a potential that Melvin Gordon is stuck in an RBBC, I have a far more confident outlook at Melvin Gordon's potential in comparison to Kenyon Drake or David Johnson. David Johnson has Phillip Lindsay, Mark Ingram, Rex Burkhead in that backfield. Do I want to touch that? Absolutely not. But I will certainly be taking my Ryan Tannehill here. Of course, the rushing upside and the rushing touchdowns there make a huge difference. Again, Tom Brady is a great option, but in a 4-point per passing touchdown format, I would much rather have Ryan Tannehill as it currently stands. Of course, Tom Brady comes off the board there to good old Tony. Either way, this is the roster I've constructed. Of course, like I mentioned a little bit earlier, if I switch Tyreek with Aaron Jones, I secure myself potentially a better overall player with Tyreek Hill over Aaron Jones. And then I switch Darrell Henderson with Robert Woods. You could see a very similar draft here in which it could be just as valuable. So again, it just depends on how it ends up breaking down. But regardless, that's just pretty much what I wanted to show. This is the first live mock draft of the 2021 fantasy football season. There's a lot more content to come. Let me know what you guys think of the drafts down below and the strategy down below in terms of drafting running back early, waiting on wide receiver because of how much more upside there is at the position, how much more depth there is in comparison to running backs that are all stuck in running back by committee situations that you don't want to get into the grime. And selecting, of course, that tight end and that quarterback early that you can invest in and you can rely upon 16 games out of the season. Again, they're only going to be missing 4 to their bye week, assuming all things go well. So again, addressing those singular one-start positions, waiting on wide receiver, investing in stud RBs. That's the strategy. Either way, thank you everybody for watching. Until tomorrow's episode, I'll see you guys. Peace.